Welcome to Peak, Train Like a Girl, a podcast by girls in sport, for girls and coaches in sport. We're here to amplify your voice because it deserves to be heard. At Peak, we are a safe place for girls to hang out, learn, grow, and build community. We empower girls in sport and coaches with knowledge, resources, and support we think is necessary in today's athletic environments to thrive. Join us for bold conversations about experiences of girls in sport. Our discussions will make you laugh, cry, cheer, for sure get frustrated, and hopefully rethink the future of girls in sport for generations to come. So whether you're walking, commuting, cleaning your bedroom, or joining us with a friend, make sure you take a minute to follow us. It helps more than you can imagine. Check out our website and share with a female athlete or coach you love. Now, I am super excited to introduce you to our next guest, Kate. She is a licensed directory for practitioners and coaches who are certified in a multitude of different varieties of everything from therapists to coaches to eating disorder specialists to strength and conditioning coaches. And they go through and they vet the people that are going to be listed. And it's a great way for not only us as professionals to connect with other professionals, it's also a super awesome way for coaches and athletes to connect with professionals. So I am so excited to bring Kate in. We haven't had a licensed therapist on before, and I'm so excited to get warmed up. Are you ready, Kate?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Vanilla or chocolate?
Vanilla all the way.
Me too. I don't think that we are in the majority. I think we're the minority.
Yeah.
Podcast or Netflix?
Ooh, that's a hard one.
I know we have hard-hitting questions here.
Probably, I'm going to say Netflix because I need more things to relax me, and that relaxes me more than a podcast.
Nice. I think we're going to have to talk about that for sure. All right. Blow dry your hair or air dry your hair?
Right now, I'm on a blow dry kick.
Nice. I like it. Road trip or plane?
Ooh, I'll say plane.
Nice. All right. You want to get there quick?
I do. Like road trips, but my body doesn't like road trips.
I like it. Let somebody else be in charge. I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I also forgot to mention you're with Serendipity Counseling. The other really cool thing about you and your specialty and your counseling services is that you are licensed in a multitude of states, which is pretty awesome. I think that's something that's changing in your profession. So why don't we actually start with you telling us a little bit about your experience with girls in sport, however you want to start, whether that's grade school or high school, and then maybe take us up to where you are now with Serendipity.
Yeah, sure. So my experience with girls in sport is being a girl that did a sport. I ran in high school and college and post-collegiately and still currently run. And so my specialty is eating disorders within athletes, and I personally struggled with my own eating disorder, and that's kind of how I got in this realm of that being my specialty. Once I recovered, I really wanted to focus on helping others. And I found that the area of sports, it's a different beast being in a sport and struggling with that. And so my goal is to be able to increase the conversation and make it, I guess, more known that it is here and it's happening and that eating disorders are actually more common among athletes. And the more we talk about it, the more folks will feel like they can get support. And so that brought me to starting my own company, Serendipity Counseling Services. And I absolutely just love working with specifically runners, but I work with all different athletes. Most of the folks that I see are female. I do see some males as well, but females tend to reach out for support more.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Nice. I saw that on your website, and I know I want to say this and I want to kind of switch gears just a little, is that 70% of athletes have disordered eating, which is not an eating disorder, but have disordered eating patterns. That's a huge number, 70%.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I don't think people realize how common it is. And, you're right, it's not an eating disorder.
Yep.
However, it's just how food may impact how we live our day-to-day life. There's some anxiety, or we're not eating in a way that best supports our body, or anything along those lines.
Yeah. And we're going to get back and talk about all of that, but you were gracious enough to allow us to start having conversations specifically around mental health and what some people are saying is a mental health crisis in this country right now. And I guess the question I want to ask you, there's two parts to the question. Is I'm wondering, and this is my curiosity and some of what I'm experiencing being in the trenches. I am in high school athletics. I'm wondering if it's a mental health crisis or if it's really a loneliness crisis. So that's question number one. And the question number two is, I'm wondering if the conversations surrounding mental health, which are obviously incredible because they're taking them out of the dark and putting them into the light. But I'm wondering if we have become overly focused on the I-centric piece of mental health and not talking enough about the communal piece of how your relationship with yourself, both physically and mentally, not only impacts you, but impacts others around you, which again, maybe even ties into that first question. Are we really in a loneliness crisis? So what are your thoughts there professionally?
Those are both really, really great questions. And I'm going to say it's not one or the other. It's everything combined. I think as athletes, with pro athletes out there, we see them destroying training and, going at it. And athletes in general have that like go, go, go mentality and pushing ourselves. And everyone wants to find like that zone where they can just push and push through the pain and all of that. And I think it's very much idolized, and it makes it hard to be a human being because we are all people outside of our sport. And no matter who the elite athlete is, from stories that I have heard and read and people I've spoken to, that they have actually been the best version of themselves in their sport when they know who the version of that they are outside of their sport. So they have something else going on. They're able to balance their life in some kind of way. And then they can be the best and the most present when they're actually competing.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the things, we have three categories that we educate on at Peak. One is FIT, which is female integrated training, which is where I kind of lay my hat. EAT, which is energy, appetite, and timing, and then rest, which is recover, enrich, sleep, and technology. So that enrich piece is something I think that you're talking about. Who are you outside the classroom and who are you outside your sport? I mean, do you love sewing? Do you like playing games? And again, that's why we ask some of those silly questions. Like, is it a podcast or Netflix? I think sometimes what I experience with high performing athletes is they're like, I don't know, I have no idea the last time I was able to watch a Netflix movie. And I'm like, oh, do we think that's a problem? So do you get, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, just knowing who they are, because no matter, even say running, I ran competitively and now I'm not in college anymore, but I can still run. Not every sport has that available. And, it's not the same running now that it was in college.
Sure.
And so when we lose that part of our identity, we have to still know who we are, or we feel very, very lost. And I think that's a piece where the loneliness can come in, especially when you're a part of a team and then that team you're not a part of anymore. we can feel really, really lonely. I think also the aspect of that is when we don't talk about hard things, we
Mm.
often do feel alone in what we are struggling with.
Yeah, say more there, because I think that's a really interesting point. Maybe not the right word, but kind of like this toxic positivity. That's not a great analogy, but this oversimplification that we're always just okay, we're all good. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, a lot of the folks that I work with really do struggle to show their vulnerable side.
Hmm.
And I think that part of that has to do with athletes being in that kind of go, go, go mentality and feeling like they need to be tough and have a tough
Hmm.
exterior and push through the pain. And that makes you feel more isolated, I feel. When we open up to those people around us that are in our close circle, we're able to see that we don't need to be alone, even if it is a sport, you know, like running that has a team aspect, but also is very individual. The, even if it is an individual sport, we're not alone in it. I mean, I've seen some of the most bonding experiences with teams being after a really hard, hard track workout where everyone was really struggling. And then they can say like, wow, we did that together. We did that
Hmm.
really hard thing together.
Yeah, that's super good. What do you think? Do you think social media has had an impact on both the mental health crisis and the loneliness crisis, or that ability to not be something different? Vulnerable is a word you're using outside of sport because people are looking at the images portrayed out there. Do you think there's an impact there?
I don't think it's black and white. I
Okay.
think that it has made it easier to stay in contact with people and to have
Mm-hmm.
more positive influences in our life.
Hmm.
And I think that it also does the opposite and makes it easier to feel isolated, look at people's life that are posting all the positive, wonderful things in their life and feeling like their life is wonderful and your life isn't. It's
Yeah.
easy to play that comparison game. So I think there's a little bit of both. Do I think it impacted the mental health crisis? I do. It's an ever evolving thing, just like, us being human beings. It's just a
Sure.
new thing that we have to figure out how to tackle together because there are pros and cons to it. I do believe that's how you found me, right? On
Agreed.
social
I was just going to
media.
say that. Yep, I
Yeah.
agree. That yeah, I'm with you. I think pros and cons out there. I do have, I did go back and study digital wellness because I thought it was important
Mm,
enough. I mean, one of the things I agree there, it's not black and white and there's both sides and somewhere in the middle is the truth. What I do think is true is that young children are exposed to social media at too young of an age when they're not developmentally ready to decipher
hmm
what is right for them, what is not right for them, what is
mm,
true and what is not true. And so
hmm
that there's a program out there called Wait Until 8 that I think is really good. Just the delaying of putting a phone or social media into a young person's
Yeah.
hands. Do you think there's value there?
Yeah, I have heard value in that. I was recently, can't remember what podcast it was, but I was recently listening to a podcast on that where they were talking about that difficulty at the young age, but also the pros and cons to it once folks get a little bit older.
Yeah. I think that's right. This was so far like there's so many things and I love that you're not it's not black or white. There's some nuance in there, which I know is case by case. And I guess before we move on, and I do want to open up to Megan, this is not therapy. So I guess I should have probably started with that.
Yeah.
It is not therapy. This is a conversation. And hopefully it's a conversation that opens eyes and allows you as humans to maybe ask some more difficult questions or maybe even take a chance of getting vulnerable. So I do want to kind of give that little caveat. But Megan, before we kind of circle back to talk about some of Kate's expertise, do you have anything you want to add or ask about before we do that?
Um, I don't think so, but I know I've mentioned this on a lot of the previous podcasts. But I think again and again, a point that I keep coming back to is just overall the amount of information and different things I wish I could have, had starting my college career or even just my overall athletics career. So I just super love anyone who is talking about topics for young athletes, especially female athletes, on top of just how much social media and just all of the talk in general, not even just social media, just in school and everything. So I just love all of this, and I'm so glad that you're on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Love that. So let's go. Go ahead. Sorry, Kate.
I was just going to say, I think that piece of just wanting to spread the word and talk about it more and make that more common and folks to feel like they can approach certain topics more, like that vulnerability is what reduces the stigma and reduces the shame that we feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe there's a really big connection between vulnerability and reducing shame.
I think you're exactly right. And I'm writing that down because I think that is really true. I know, which is Brene Brown does a lot of stuff around that specifically. And I think she does a really good job with it. That idea of the connection between the two of those and that the interplay of them. So I think that is really good. And I think that is really worth noting. So let's go back and talk a little bit about Serendipity. So it is interesting that you are now licensed in a variety of states, which wasn't the case, right? It used to be you could only be licensed in one state. Am I correct?
So possibly, to be honest, I'm not completely sure. It would be a lot more difficult. You could be licensed, I think, in multiple states if you had multiple offices.
Got it.
But it didn't used to be so common to practice virtual. And that's what I do. I am completely virtual.
Got it.
So I can see folks in multiple states.
That's really, and tell me what that is like. Tell me, so someone's looking for a mental health counselor or therapist. Talk to me about the difference between in-person and virtual and the pros and cons of each of those.
Yeah, so I've done both. I've worked at all different levels of care. And I started doing virtual during the pandemic. And I personally found that folks just feel really comfortable in their own home. And it makes it more convenient.
Sure.
I was going back to that kind of go personality. We're busy human beings, and if it's more difficult to fit in therapy, makes it less likely that you're going to stick to it.
That's so good. So
I am all about doing what is best to help you just stay, because that consistency is what's going to really help. But the comfort of your own home, like I'll have my dog in with my therapy sessions with me all the time. And people get to see that side of me, and then I get to see them with their animals and their home. And some of the young girls will show me some of their favorite things in their room. And I just get to know a different side of them that I feel as though it may be more difficult if we were in an office.
I love that. Yeah, there's a comfort to it, right?
Yeah. Comfort I
really like that. Yeah, I love that. And thank you for pointing that out. I sometimes think that people, and again, it's so easy for us to put a charge on something, good, bad, healthy, unhealthy. And I do want to talk about that. And it's the same thing, like, oh, virtual is, good or bad, or, in person is good or bad. No, they both have their values, right? And it's just figuring out what makes the most sense for you. Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting is when you were talking about that 70% of athletes have some type of disordered eating, maybe even explain, a variety of disordered eating patterns that maybe looks, different than a eating disorder. So maybe you can explain some of that. But also I loved that you went through and you broke it into nutrition performance. And then you did talk about loneliness. So, that eating disorders look different on the outside but they're consistent on the inside. I thought that was a really interesting, I've been in this industry a long time and I am definitely a learner. So I love to listen. I also struggled with eating disorder growing up through my formative years. And this is the first time I've honestly heard that it looks different on the outside, which I think both you and I know, but the consistency from the inside. So maybe start there and just talk to us about how you came to that and how you break it down.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest difference between eating disorders and disordered eating is the level of stress that it brings to your life. There has to be some kind of overwhelm, stress, anxiety in order for it to be considered an eating disorder. That consuming thoughts around food and what to eat, when to eat it, what's quote unquote perfect to fuel for my race, things like that. There has to be that level of stress, but also the piece of that is that eating disorders are kind of put in certain boxes.
Yeah.
There's a couple different types. I'm not going to go into the details, but there's a couple different types of eating disorders, and they really help basically for insurance to pay for treatment, which I'm all about getting support from insurance.
Right.
However, it becomes tricky because a lot of folks don't fit in those exact boxes. And so to me, it doesn't matter if it's disordered eating or if it's an eating disorder. If you're struggling with your relationship with food or your body, you deserve help. You deserve to talk through it, process it, figure out what's going on and how to, grow from it. So yeah, that's kind of my perspective of the difference. I don't remember what your other question was.
I want to stick here for just a minute though. So you said struggling around food, body image. Do you think exercise also goes in there?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
That, I
think
mean,
something people miss that
I agree.
Okay. So can you explain a little bit about what you and I are talking about?
Yeah. So there's, especially with my athletes, I often see exercise play a role, whether it's feeling stress over taking a day off or a rest day, feeling like you need to run more miles, trying to compensate maybe for what you're eating instead of working on just fueling your body,
Yeah.
It really can. And that when we struggle with the relationship with exercise like that, it can alter how we feel about our sport.
Sure.
And that was part of my experience, which is what also led me here to do this work, is that I started dreading running.
Yeah.
And I ran since I was 10 years old. I loved it, but it just felt like a chore.
Yeah.
And I actually had to take a year off in college, and that was purely my choice, not injury based. One of the hardest decisions ever. And it allowed me to figure out if I actually enjoyed running anymore. And turns out I did.
Nice.
It just took some work on my end to fall back in love with the sport. And when you struggle with your relationship with food and with your body and with exercise, it just takes the fun out of something that you used to love. And that goes back to your view on loneliness, where we then feel lonely and we feel like, running was such a big part of my life for so long, and all of a sudden I hate it. I felt lost and alone. Yeah.
I think and isolated, right? Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the part of the question we can get back to that now, is that eating disorders or disordered eating looks different on the outside. I think that's super important. It comes in a bunch of different shapes and sizes. It's not a one shape fits all, but it's consistent on the inside. That's the part that I thought was really interesting. Then you broke down the nutrition and mental health, performance, mental health, and then loneliness and mental health.
So I'm wondering if the part on the inside that you're thinking of is kind of that everyone is struggling, and no matter what body size you're in or shape of your body, the number on the scale, like those thoughts and feelings can be really similar.
Yeah.
Feeling like we're alone, like we're not good enough, like the self-confidence just decreases and really struggling with those internal thoughts.
Yeah.
That I have found that folks that have different eating disorders can still connect in those types of ways. But on the outside, there's a lot of different ways that it can look, and oftentimes it is silent. Folks may not know that anyone is struggling. There's the stereotype that you are in a smaller body if you are struggling with an eating disorder. So if you have a quote unquote normal size body, then I get all the time that I'm not sick enough. I'm not struggling enough. It feels again isolating, and it feels like you don't deserve help. And it's a terrible myth because I have seen every eating disorder in all different types of bodies, and it doesn't matter what the outside is. It matters what's going on internally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're spot on there. So, and obviously that's what makes you very good at what you do. The other piece that I thought that was interesting, I've got two questions here, is that why does running and eating disorders go hand in hand? And you break down that there's some genetic components, some social, cultural factors, and some sports related factors. So I would love for you to explain that. I'm also curious though, do you think running and swimming have a lot of similarities when it comes to just because of what they wear and what they look like and the amount of work, and it's alone, all kind of the same things?
Yeah, they do have a lot of similarities, and endurance sports have a higher risk of eating disorders in general. And there is also the aspect of uniforms. Absolutely. Female-bodied runners have small, tight uniforms, and so do swimmers. And that's definitely a factor that we've seen play into body image and eating disorders. But there's a lot of different factors that play into eating disorders. I always call it like the perfect storm because there's not just one thing that causes an eating disorder. It's a handful of things that just come together. Like we don't have, as far as we know, a specific gene in our body that says, you're prone to getting an eating disorder. However, there's certain characteristics that we see a lot that are really common in eating disorders, like perfectionism, that high pain tolerance we see also, where, runners often don't notice injuries until it's too late, right? How many times has that happened to you?
Right.
I know it's happened to me plenty. And we have that high pain tolerance. And that actually is something that is common among eating disorders as well, where it feels like it's easier to fight hunger, discomfort, pain, all the things that come with eating disorders.
It's interesting about the endurance sport piece. Like, I just want to kind of hone in on that, whether it's endurance, whether you're talking swimming or running, or I'm sure biking falls in there then too. It's interesting that the very essence of an endurance sport means that you need more fuel. It's just interesting that then those are the people that are choosing to fuel less. Like, that is a little confusing, right?
Yeah. And I mean, yes, fueling is a part of it. And I see restriction as a very big piece of a lot of eating disorders. However, binge eating disorder is actually the most common eating disorder.
Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So that's basically when there's a large consumption of food in a certain period of time, and it can lead to a lot of discomfort, physically, emotionally. There's a lot of shame involved, and it can be very painful. A lot of feeling loss of control, and that can lead to hiding food or sneaking food just because of all the shame that's involved around it. And that's actually the most common eating disorder. And I would not disclude that from the athletic community at all.
Hmm. And then the same as that would also be then if binge eating disorders, then it would also be binge exercising. I'm going to go out and run for 2 hours or swim for 2 hours or get on my bike for 4 hours. Is that true?
That wouldn't, again, this goes back to eating disorders fitting into boxes, which I hate.
Yep.
And so it wouldn't technically be classified as binge eating disorder, but yes, yes, that is very common. I see that all the time, where it then goes to that excessive exercise.
Yeah. I know that you and I are talking about athletes, and so I do understand that, but I'm wondering if some of what happens specifically with running, because as you said, like to be able to play tennis after college means you need a tennis court, you need somebody else, it costs money, it takes whatever. To go swimming, you need a pool. Running is easy. I mean, you put on a pair of shoes and you go. But I'm also wondering if some of the connection between running and eating disorder is because of a lot of people, and I'm not talking about high performing athletes, but people in general, I see this in my industry, start running to lose weight. I'm wondering, do you see the connection there or no?
Again, yes and no. I have seen running be the most triggering type of exercise for someone, and I have seen it be the escape that once they're able to exercise and feel healthy in their body and all of that they turn to running and it's actually helpful. So I have seen it go both ways. It is very common though to turn towards things like running when someone is trying to compensate with exercise and doing the over exercise and all of that.
Yeah, it's complicated, which is why there's professionals like you out there, right?
Yeah. It very much is. And it's even complicated being an eating disorder specialist, where a lot of eating disorder specialists are a bit nervous about the exercise piece. And it can kind of be put out there as, oh, you have to stop exercising altogether until you're healed. And I think that scares a lot of athletes into getting help. And my goal is to not rip you away from your sport. I want to keep you in it as long as possible. So I'm the one talking to coaches. I'll talk to physical therapists, doctors, athletic trainers to try to help keep you in it, even if it's just connecting with your teammates, because we don't want you to feel more isolated.
Sure.
Yeah. And I don't want that. I would never want that to scare someone out of getting help.
Yeah. We see that now. I see this quite often in where I work now. I see that a lot now with therapists allowing athletes to stay connected to team as long as the athlete wants to, right?
Yeah.
And again, the shutdown isn't quite the same as it looked like even, I would say, 10 years ago. So I do think in general, your industry seems to be moving more that way. That's just my experience from a coaching perspective. So we're going to start winding down here in a minute, but what are some tips that you can give to athletes, coaches, or caretakers when we're talking specifically about an athlete in relationship to mental health? What are some key takeaways, or what are maybe some signs caretakers and coaches and athletes, right? Because they're with each other, should be looking for? Why don't we start there? Are there certain things we should be looking for?
Well, I actually want to start with your first point, because this goes back to what you were asking in the very beginning of, is it about the community altogether or is it about the individual?
Yeah.
And my answer of it being both, I think the best thing that teammates, coaches, parents can do is to demonstrate healthy behaviors, vulnerability, open conversations. This is what I have seen be the most helpful, because it's not about saying that these things are never going to happen. It's about, do the folks that are struggling feel comfortable asking for help? So I think that a lot of times what I tell folks, just a couple things like eating, like classifying all foods as equal, not
Yep.
labeling foods
Yep.
as good or bad. I have seen folks who are struggling to eat difficult foods, and as the second I convince their parents to eat it with them, they're like, "Oh, mom's eating it? Yeah, okay, I'll eat it with mom." It When we see it done and we see it normalized, kids feel more comfortable doing it. And so this goes to everything from normalizing all foods to that aspect of just general mental health and being vulnerable and having hard conversations, and even the social media aspect. I have seen parents that, you know, their kids may be on social media and see hard things, but they're talking about those hard things with their kids and normalizing it or not normalizing it and having the conversation of why that's not okay.
Yeah.
And I find that to really be the most helpful. And that goes for teammates also. If your teammates are talking about how they're uncomfortable with their body and they want to lose weight, that's going to normalize that kind of mentality on the team. If they're talking about wanting to go to a team bonding pizza party and how awesome that's going to be and how they can all connect over it, then that's going to be the team mentality and mindset.
Really good. Really good. And then also not running while injured, making sure they're taking their off days when they're taking their off days. Just normalizing all of those, that those are the winning behaviors.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's super. That was really helpful. We are going to cool down, but Megan, do you have anything you want to ask or add before we do that?
I don't, but I really appreciated the comparison, especially to swimming, because I did find a lot of similarities that, you know, I think some people would think, oh, that's obvious. But to me, I was like, whoa, that is actually so true. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. All right, Kate, this is another hard-hitting question, but if talent were not an issue, what sport would you love to excel in?
Honestly, running. That's how much I love it. Yeah, I love running.
Well, you got to fill me in on a race then. Are we doing the marathon? Are we doing the mile? Are we doing a sprint? What kind of race?
I would say half marathon.
Nice. Do you have any female athletes out right there right now that you're like really like loving?
Oh my gosh, I have so many. I follow a lot of female athletes. Specifically, I follow folks that have struggled with eating disorders, and I love a good comeback story. Yeah, Ali Ostrandler, I follow her.
Yeah, she's got a good comeback story, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does. But there's a lot of good ones out there.
That's absolutely amazing. So I can't tell you how much I personally, and I know Megan is going to say the same, appreciate, first of all, your time. I know your time is valuable, so I want to start there. But just the grace and the confidence that you have with the conversation. And sometimes your grace and confidence shows up in, two things can be true, or I'm not, we're not really sure, or there's such a sincerity and such a kindness to you over such a challenging topic and such a challenging conversation. So I hope you feel my gratitude, because I really do mean that. And how lucky are athletes out there to have somebody like you in the ring with them, and willing to, help them through like some pretty murky times. So thank you for what you do professionally. Thank you for what you give back. I really, really do appreciate that. So I hope everybody else has really, you are so welcome. Thank you. I hope everybody else has really enjoyed the conversation. I've taken so many notes. I'll make sure I put them in the show notes. Some really good advice. And I want to make sure that we really highlight that, because I thought that the advice that you gave was so spot on. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Make sure you take a minute to follow us. I know we keep saying it, but it really helps get the information out there to so many people who need to hear these conversations. If you can, join us